As you know, I've been appointed 18 months ago to a new mandate with the UN to try and protect what we call environmental defenders. And we have at the UN a very broad definition of environmental defenders, which are in fact all people who are trying simply to protect their environment, biodiversity, climate. My role is to receive cases, that is complaint coming from those defenders who are simply looking at the UN as a way to provide them to protection in the broad sense, in fact. We try to engage with them, to discuss with them, to find out what they are facing, and then deciding with them what to do. And the first thing we are trying to do is to contact the government when the government might be responsible, or a company, because sometimes it's not the government, but a company which is responsible of the attacks against defenders. And we engage with the government with what we call a letter of allegation. Okay. Which clearly means that we don't accuse the government, we simply relay information received and ask the government to comment, and they have 60 days to reply to my letter of allegations. And if they don't, then I'm trying to pursue with other means. So in the case of climate activists, in fact, it was not my choice to work on climate action. It was only because when I took up the mandate in October 2022, I decided to travel to Europe, mostly to meet with government, to explain my mandate, try to seek political backing, but also my practice also to invite defenders to meet with me at each and every occasion, just to get a sense of what's happening in countries, to listen to testimony, what they are expecting from the mandate, to shape the mandate according to the needs of the defenders themselves. And really, I must say, together with the team, we are struck by the fact that the first who came to meet with me, in fact, were young climate activists, telling me stories, I mean, you know very well, blowing their hands on the floor, on the table, blocking access to airports or to roads, using new forms of mobilization to draw the attention on the fact that their governments were not implementing properly the Paris Agreement. It was a pressing need for them to do something, to show that something needs to be done, in fact. And in return, I got many testimonies from France, from Spain, from Portugal, from Italy, Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, Germany, I mean, all countries, in fact, with the same pattern of attacks against those young people who are simply trying to peacefully express their needs, in fact. And they spoke of the political discourse, like ministers, like the Prime Minister in UK, calling them eco-zealots or eco-terrorists in France, or green Khmers in Germany, or green Talibans in Austria. They are simply, peaceful protesters, in fact, going to the street to express their concerns, in fact. And then they spoke on the fact that when they go to the street, then block for half an hour a street, then they are arrested, sometimes like in France very brutally by the police, and we know that France is the most brutal police in all Europe. In Germany also, it was striking to see that they are using new techniques, in fact, to arrest those activists. You know, it's pain grip, like it's very painful.
Explain that.
Yeah, the police officer, they would take the people by the hands, turning the hand and back here, which is very painful. In fact, for me, that's torture, in fact, according to the conventional torture. And then they also came to me telling what's happening when they are arrested in police stations. Brutality of the police in some countries. Sometimes humiliation as well, like in the case of Portugal, where women were separated from their male colleagues, went to a room in front of male police officers, were asked to strip and to stand naked in front of male police officers, with no reaction from the government. Then they spoke they are using every techniques, like throwing paints on monuments, or soap, and then being vilified by the population. And then we also got testimonies on what's happening in courts, And that's why I decided to also use my mandate to observe trial, to see whether or not those trials are in conformity with international obligation by states to a fair trial. And I've done already a few trial observations in different countries to see what's happening in court. And having received a complaint from UK, many complaints in fact from UK, I've decided to use one of these complaints to monitor a trial here in London, in the case of Daniel Shaw, to see what's happening and then to decide what to do next with my mandate in fact.
What is Britain's obligations under the Aarhus Convention, and what happens if they don't fulfil those obligations?
Yeah, Aarhus Convention is based on three big pillars. That's important to understand the connection between the pillars and what I'm currently seeing in Europe, in fact. The first pillar is access to information. That is, everyone who might be affected by a project in his environment have the right to receive any information coming from the government or the company. And information is not only to post information on the website and let people know that the information is there, that is to provide information, to be proactive. The second pillar is public participation, meaning that individuals, communities have the right also to be consulted, and it's compulsory in fact, meaning it's mandatory. And the Aarhus Convention is a legally binding instrument, meaning that states have an obligation to fulfill all the requirements of this convention. And the last pillar is access to justice. When you see that access to information, public participation has been denied, then you have the right to access to justice. Observing the trial, that's a way for me to see whether or not access to justice is granted in UK. That is the right to a fair trial, which is clearly defined by other international treaties, like the European Convention on Human Rights. In Article 6, on the right to a fair trial, explains what really is a fair trial. And one of the components of a fair trial is the right to present your defense, to decide whether or not you want to be represented, to choose yourself your lawyer, but also to explain to the jury the reasons why you have decided to do something, in fact, and why you are facing a possible sentence. And in the case of climate activists, in the case of Daniel Shaw and other activists, they have decided to use what we call civil disobedience, which for me respond to 4 criteria. The people know pretty well they are breaking the law, but that's a decision. Breaking the law, that means that they are ready to face a tribunal. It should be, second criteria, public, to break the law in public, to protest against, I would say, a sort of unjust law, and then it should be also done non-violently. And the clause of non-violence for me is very important. Civil disobedience is covered by, again, international human rights law. That is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights clearly says that Article 21, that the right to protest covers also civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, it means also, you can also bring disruption. And that's precisely what we see in UK and other countries, in fact. And they have decided precisely to disrupt the daily life, to draw the attention, so that breaking the law, disrupting lives, but nonetheless, that's the right to protest which is at stake, in fact, and that should be protected and guaranteed.
So what happens if you find that the British government haven't fulfilled their obligations under the convention, and what are the consequences?
In the case of Daniel Shaw, but we have also many cases in UK who have sent letters of allegations. In the case of Daniel Shaw and other defendants, the UK government has failed to reply, and that's why we have issued a public statement drawing the attention that the fact that not responding to one of my letters of allegations could have consequences, and one of the consequences would be, like for instance, the possibility for me to refer to another body inside the Aarhus Convention, which is the Compliance Committee. And the Compliance Committee is a quasi-judicial body that is there to look at how states would comply with the provision of the Convention. We don't want to go into detail now. It's not relevant for me to decide, because I've not decided to refer the case to the compliance committee, but just to show that there might be also have implications. In fact, the problem is that for me, if that's the case, UK is not only not fulfilling its obligations related to the Aarhus Convention, but also to other obligations, international matters law, for instance, and that again has also implications for UK. They will be later on examined by different organs at the UN. And if we come to the UN with a poor record in terms of right to a fair trial or the right to protest, and then could lead to political implications.
There's so much to unpack in everything you've said so far, so I'm going to just rewind a little bit. One of the first things that struck me is you were saying when you started this 18 months ago, it wasn't necessarily focused on climate activists, environmental defenders.
Exactly, yeah.
But it's become that because you've been shocked by...
my team and myself, we were shocked, in fact, by hearing stories. And I could add also many things. Like, interesting also to see that in some countries, the climate activists asked me and my team to leave my telephone outside of the room, my computer, and they say, we are currently under constant surveillance. They were not able to provide me with the evidences. But the mere fact that they're saying in a democratic country, I don't want to mention the country, that they are under surveillance by the police, that shows something on the way those activists are treated. And I still don't understand why they are perceived as being dangerous, in fact. They are non-violent people, young people, going to the street, yes, blocking an access to airport, throwing soap on a monument, which is a petty offense for me, and in return facing, like in the case of Daniel Shaw, up to 10 years prison, which is unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And one of the other things you mentioned is the language that's being used, not just by the media, but also by politicians and people in government, talking about them as if they're terrorists. And that's certainly something I've picked up, which I found quite shocking, is these very gentle, conscientious, non-violent people are being treated as if they're terrorists.
Exactly. And the mere idea to compare those activists, non-violent young people, being treated like terrorists, that's something which is for me difficult to understand. There might be something behind. I don't want to say anything on this, but we need to investigate on why is it that precisely those who are working on oil, gas, are treated as criminals, in fact.
I've been filming other activist groups with other issues as well, and what I've observed is there's been situations where non-violent peaceful protesters have been doing disruptive things and the police haven't been going in and arresting them. And I've thought, gosh, if they were climate activists, the police would have been in there and they would have handcuffed with them and arrested them within minutes. So I guess what you're saying is you're agreeing with me in that the climate activists, the environmental defenders, seem to be being targeted specifically by governments.
Exactly, yeah. And you may have noted that in other countries in Europe, like in France or in Belgium, in Germany, farmers are using the same techniques, in fact. They are blocking the access to airports, to road, sometimes more than half an hour, sometimes for days and weeks in some countries, and no reaction by the police. None of them, at least in France, has been brought to court, in fact. So why is it that two types of protest are receiving two types of response by the government? And even in France, the Ministry of Interior publicly said that those farmers that are blocking an access to road are pursuing a legitimate action, in fact. Their action is legitimate, in fact. While those who are blocking the road for protesting against the inaction of the government to implement the Paris Agreement, that's not relevant.
I think that point's not being understood by a lot of people, actually, that difference in policing of protesters is quite notable and quite shocking. One of the first things that got me into making this film was the silencing of climate protesters, environmental defenders in court. I started this outside the Inner London Crown Court when Judge Silas Reed was preventing protesters from explaining their motivations as to why they sat in the road and blocked traffic. You're here observing Daniel Shaw's case. You're finding that silencing in court is quite widespread in the UK?
That's something that we don't see in other countries, in fact. I've been also monitoring trials like in France and receiving also information on what's happening in Germany and other courts. And the idea that a judge could decide all alone what is acceptable evidence to present to the jury is something which is, for me, difficult to understand. How a democracy would not be able to allow the defendant to present the evidence properly and to decide themselves, together with the lawyers, what is the defense, in fact, what are the evidences that they want to produce, and eventually what are the witnesses they want to produce, including myself. They could call me as a witness to provide my testimony to the court on the cases or broadly on the right to protest. And the fact that they are prevented in UK to do so is a matter of great concern for me. And again, as I was saying, for me that's the right to a fair trial, which is currently at risk in UK. And observing that from outside, that's a matter of concern not only for me, but for other rapporteurs. And when I share the information to other colleagues, they are really surprised to see what's happening in UK. So I don't want to comment in detail on the case of Daniel Shaw, but really for me the mere fact that the judge would ask the jury to leave the room and to discuss with the defendant, it's not acceptable what you're going to say. That's something which is appalling, I would say.
Which brings me to this very strange situation which I observed again this week of people sitting outside courthouses here in the UK with placards saying juries have the right to hear the whole truth. What I witnessed was a group of people silently sitting outside Southwark Crown Court with those signs, who were all arrested and then taken inside to the cells inside, and they're arrested for contempt of court for holding a sign which is correct in law. Yeah. I mean, what do you make of that?
I mean, I don't really understand the law on contempt in UK, which is different from other countries. But again, the mere fact that you are not allowed to stand in front of a court with a sign saying that the jury has the right to be informed or to receiving any kind of information which is relevant for the defense, coming from outside, that's difficult to understand.
No, I mean,
I've not seen that in other countries, in fact.
You don't see that anywhere else? No. I think a lot of people are shocked by that because we assume that in the UK, the juries have the right to hear the whole truth.
We all come, we have with the idea that the UK is a big democracy. And why is it that in the UK precisely the right to protest is such at risk?
I mean, how's it comparing with other countries? Is the UK sort of similar to other countries in terms of that trajectory, or?
I've prepared a report, in fact, based on evidences received on the right to protest in the EU. And in that report, I provide a lot of testimonies, but also links to public statements by politicians, by media, to show that more or less in many countries, the right to protest is currently at risk because of those young climate activists who are severely treated by many governments. In fact, apart maybe of Norway in the north of Europe, which is a bit different. But clearly, what I said after having spent 2 days in the UK a couple of months ago, it was one of my trip to one of the countries in Europe where I met those activists and also met with their legal counsels. I went to meet with the government. I met with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Environment in UK. Said I don't want to comment on individual cases because I've not been able to send you formal letters of allegations, but nonetheless, I will go public immediately, and for the first time, I will say that what's happening in the UK for me is appalling. That the right to protest is at risk, and I'll come back. So they said, you're more than welcome to come back to comment on cases. I was supposed to come back to the UK precisely this week, but because of the election, they have decided to postpone, which is really, can understand, to a stage. So I do hope to have the possibility to come back to the UK in the fall, and then to discuss properly with the government my assessment of the situation, discuss individual cases, but also more broadly what needs to be done to change the situation in the UK. One of the things I want to discuss with them is the two recent acts. I don't have the names of the two acts, 22 and 23, Police Act and Law and...
yeah, the new Public Order Act in 2023, and prior to that, the Crime and Sentencing Act. To
comment maybe with them on what provisions in those two acts could be repealed eventually, to change the way right to protest is protected in the UK.
It's interesting that we're having this discussion today because it was the general election last night, and the government is changed today to Labour, so it'll be very interesting to see if you get a different response.
Yeah, at the same time, when you see that law and order is one of the slogans of the governments, then might also be a matter of concern for me. I fully understand that a government would say that they have a duty to make sure that law and order are respected, but also the right to protest in that framework should also be guaranteed, and hopefully the new government will maybe change different legislations or practices to guarantee a better access to the right to protest in the UK.
Yeah. I mean, Keir Starmer has said he's not going to repeal the Public Order Act of 2023, which I was very disappointed about, which brings me on to one of the other questions, really, which is about the role of media. I was arrested under the new Public Order Act for breach of the peace prevent, which is a very Orwellian law with extended police powers to basically arrest somebody for a crime that they haven't committed because they think they might commit it. So that was what I was arrested under when I was there to film peaceful protesters. It's also very chilling because it also meant press freedom.
Exactly, yeah. And that's something that I also saw in other countries, like in France. We also received a complaint from a journalist who was, like you, simply covering a situation by which activists would use civil disobedience as a means of action. And he was arrested together with the activist and sued by the French authorities, in fact. At the end of the day, after receiving my letter, they decided to drop the charges because he was a journalist. But nonetheless, the fact that he was arrested, and he said while being arrested, this is my press card. In my capacity as a journalist to cover a demonstration, a protest. But nonetheless, he's been arrested, like you. We have other cases in Europe as well. So the right of journalists is also a matter of concern for me. I'm also discussing with my colleagues, special rapporteurs, on how we could also make sure that we could do better to protect journalists from being arrested and sometimes also brought to court and sometimes sentenced and then ending in jail, which is the case in some countries. Yeah. Another case, it was again in France. I was covering because they called me, they put a complaint to my mandate by young activists that were climbing in trees to protect the trees to be felled because they wanted to construct a new road. And when I did arrive, there was a lot of journalists covering my presence, and they could not have access to me, and not have access to take pictures or to film the scene where I was discussing with the activists. In fact, I complained to the authorities. I put a complaint on the rights of journalists should be guaranteed. But again, another case by which the rights of journalists is not properly protected by the police or by the authorities.
There's quite a few cases of journalists in the UK who have been arrested while filming specifically environmental protests. I'm not the only one, so it's deeply worrying, and it does make you, it does make you nervous going out there. You're like, am I going to end up in handcuffs for 3 hours again? And you start to worry about. Am I being surveilled, and are they going to come for my footage? And it makes you hesitate to go out there and do that job.
My mandate needs to be promoted, in fact, now, because journalists should know that my mandate is able to cover the case of journalists.
Okay.
They are in the broad category of defenders, in fact, now. And not only those who are doing investigations, but more broadly journalists as such are to be protected by this mandate, and that some of them are currently discussing with me. We have the case also of the increasing number of SLAPPs against journalists, against media as well, simply trying to uncover stories by which a company would be behind the scene, colluding with governments or with politicians, and simply by naming the name of the company, being sued by the company, and SLAPPs as a way also to prevent journalists to do their job, in fact. So the use of SLAPPs is a matter of concern for me, and I'm also dealing with cases of journalists who are currently facing those lawsuits by companies.
You're very busy right now. That's a lot.
I'm busy, yeah.
The other thing that's completely shocked me is the proportionality of the sentences and the extent to which they're being criminalised. So one of the stories we're following is that of Marcus Decker, who's been given the longest sentence for peaceful protests in the UK ever. And what are your thoughts on the extent to which they are being punished?
But clearly, that's his case is sort of an emblematic case of the disproportionality between the sentence applied to him and the penalty applied to him and the act committed, in fact.
We have a big problem with overcrowding in our prisons right now. And what I've seen is, again, these peaceful climate protesters are quite often being remanded to prison for weeks, months before their trials, which seems extraordinary.
Indeed, yeah. That's what we see in many countries. Prisons are overcrowded. Nonetheless, young peaceful activists are put in prison on bail, and for sometimes, as you said, long durations, weeks, months, which is also difficult to understand. They are not dangerous.
Precisely.
Course, why is it that they need to be put in jail, if not to punish them, or to prevent them to pursue their actions, or to prevent others to join the group of those who are trying to go to the street to protest against inaction of the government? Yeah, that's deterrent, in fact.
And it's all about deterrent. I mean, that's why when Marcus appealed his sentence length, the judges said, no, we're going to keep it in place because they specified it was because it was a deterrent to others.
And that's the aim that they are pursuing, in fact. And the mere fact that you are trying by law to deter people to use their right to protest, peaceful right to protest, that's something which is difficult to understand in a democracy.
Might sound like a stupid question, but why is it important that we uphold that right to protest, and why is it important that we're allowed to do disruptive protests?
This is one of the basic rights that has been used since decades, or more by every people. I mean, the right to go to the street to protest against anything, provided that you are not violent. The exercise of this right should be guaranteed. That's important. That shows the level of a democracy. You simply don't need a permission to go to the street to protest, or you don't need a permission to sit in front of a court to hold a sign. That's basic rights that should be guaranteed by any government. And again, to see that in the UK it's not the case. That's a matter of concern for many observers, in fact.
And if that right to protest spontaneously, without seeking permission, is shut down, what are the consequences of that?
We have seen that in other countries then. that's again the democracy which is at risk. I don't want to comment on the risk that the UK would be facing, but nonetheless, you see in other countries illiberal regimes applying the same attacks against democracy, against the right to protest.
Mm-hmm. And where is that line between what's acceptable protests and not? So we often hear, particularly Just Stop Oil and the groups taking direct action, vilified in the press, vilified by politicians because they don't like their tactics and it's disrupting people's day-to-day life and it's not acceptable to do that. Why is it okay to disrupt people's lives by sitting in roads, or even more controversially throwing soup over a work of art?
Yeah, simply because the right to protest is guaranteed by international human rights law. That's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted a long time ago, that would guarantee the right to protest. Then governments like the UK have ratified international treaties, like the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which clearly have an Article 21 on the right to protest that precisely defines what is the right to protest, clearly defines. And then the Committee on Human Rights, which has been established to interpret the main provisions of this covenant, clearly stated, comment number 37, I guess, that civil disobedience is a form of protest which is covered, provided that it's not violent. And again, the cause of violence is very important for me. And yes, civil disobedience is covered, so it's guaranteed, it should be protected, and the text adds that disruption of ordinary life should be accepted by the population and by the authorities, and should not lead to persecution, which means that the UK apparently is not fulfilling all the obligations related to the treaties that they have ratified in the past long time ago. And that's why the UN presence here is important to recall to the British authorities that they have also to take care on what's happening.
We've touched on the media in one respect. There's another respect as well, which is the reporting that's going on. There's a lot of headlines about exactly that, disrupting people's lives and how terrible it is, using terminology like the eco-zealots and the vilification. What is the consequence of that, of the media expressing themselves in that way?
The impact it has is mostly on how, in a broad sense, the population would understand why those people are going to the street, in fact. And again, calling them eco-zealots, eco-terrorists, blah, 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 is a way also not only to vilify those people or to defame the people, but to defame the cause for which they are, in fact, trying to protest, in fact. And the cause of the climate, protection of climate, biodiversity is one of the most important things that we have to do now. And those people are trying simply to express their concern that being young, facing what they don't know what would happen in the coming decades, they say that it's urgent for us. We want to use our right to protest to simply express our concern that we are facing a terrible situation, and you are not only not fulfilling all your obligations, not implementing the Paris Agreement that you have agreed upon years ago, but you're also granting new licenses to exploit gas and oil, which again would produce the impact that we know, which is scientifically proven by many evidences, and you don't want to hear not our voice, but also the voice of the scientists that show that clearly we are facing a catastrophe.
I've seen quite a lot of situations where they've received a lot of aggression from the public. I get the impression that some of this rhetoric that we're hearing, or some of the commentary that we're getting in the press, is normalizing that, is making it okay to be violent towards peaceful protesters.
Yeah, that's what I also see in many countries, not only the UK.
During this journey I've been on of discovery over the last 18 months, there's been times where I've started questioning my own sanity. You know, here are a group of people who have been presented with some very clear facts about climate emergency, climate crisis, who are trying to do something which is legally okay, which is legally authorized, which is to protest, and then they are being silenced in court, they're being criminalized, given criminal records, sent to prison for long periods of time, and at the same time vilified by a very large percentage of the general public. And it's not computing, so I've been starting to question myself as to have I got this wrong? So I found today's interview really...
Yeah, and I mean, I welcome the work that you are doing, in fact. We need precisely to be more, to uncover those situations and to show that something is going wrong currently in the world, in our democracies, in fact. And yeah.
And here we are at a very pivotal moment, I think, in sort of geopolitical history, with obviously France going to the elections now and the rise of the far right there, British elections, American elections, and what's going on there. It's certainly interesting times.
Yeah. And matter of concern for us, because those governments have not put the protection of environment or climate on the top of their priorities. Again, I mean, they say it's not the most urgent, and sometimes they also question the scientific evidences provided by scientists, which is will lead to more complicated situations.
Thank you very much.